Well, I've said before that this Eschatology Matters, this is their channel, that eschatology doesn't really matter to Eschatology Matters. These men do not care about the truth of God's prophetic. They don't care. They're going to hold to their high partial preterism in this new Kenneth L. Gentry cult of high partial preterism / postmillennialism. And then out of that, you get Christian nationalism and really radical forms of Christian nationalism, which would require an overthrow of the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights in the United States, of the United States Constitution. And I've heard these people say, well, what's wrong with that? And I say, well, the First Amendment is the very Christ-like principle upon which the United States was built. If we don't have that, we have oppression and tyranny. That's it. But this is J. Rogers talking about the little horn of Daniel chapter 7, a preterist view of Daniel 7. Well, I don't want the preterist view. I want the actual view. What is the actual interpretation of Daniel chapter 7? Now, notice here, Roman Empire, 168 BC to 476 AD. That is correct. That is correct. But if you'll notice the inconsistency as we go back to, say, this is about the 54-minute mark. If we go back to about the 30, here, 30, I'm going to try to get it here up on the screen. 54, 53. There we go. Let's go back to this mark.
The head of gold is Babylon, but Daniel...
Look at this. Why do we have 64 BC to 70 AD here? See the inconsistency here? Because they want to focus on 70 AD. That's their focus. The Antichrist, everything happened leading up to 70 AD. Well, what happened after 70 AD, going all the way up to 476 AD? Right? What happened? What happened to the 476 AD? 70 to 470. I mean, that's like over 400 years before the fall of the Roman Empire, isn't it? It's because the high partial preterists are simply inconsistent in their views regarding the Antichrist, the little horn of Daniel chapter 7, rising up, a few years before 70 AD. And who is the little horn? Is the little horn Nero? Is the little horn Titus? Who's the little horn? Okay? It's none of these. The little horn did not arise until after the fall of the Roman Empire. And so if you look in the chat, look at all this, starting at about here. How does he identify the little horn? Daniel 7, 4 beasts that rise up out of the sea. Roman Empire went to 476 AD, not 70 AD, already off to a bad start. Look at all my comments that I'm making here, totally refuting what J. Rogers is saying this whole way through. Calvin was not an expositor of Bible prophecy. He just wasn't. He did not. Ask Calvin if he wrote a commentary on the book of Revelation. He didn't. Read Dr. John Gill's commentary on Daniel 7:24. He interprets the 10 horns properly. The 10 horns were not Roman emperors. The 10 horns were not Roman emperors. 3 horns were plucked up by the roots before the little horn rose to power. The 10 horns symbolize the 10 tribal nations that made up the Roman Empire after its fall in 476 AD. You see, but they want to shove the little horn all the way back to 70 AD. False. Absolutely false. So here is Daniel 7, what rough beasts, and the Antichrist, because the Antichrist is the little horn of Daniel 7. So the dispensational futurists say, oh, we're still awaiting the rise of a Mr. Diabolical, only after a mythical pre-trib rapture, and only during a mythical 7 last years of Earth's history before the second advent. These people are brainwashed into errors, falsehoods, and lies. So, in contradistinction to this view, preterism teaches that the Antichrist was a single solitary individual human being. Notice the presuppositions of both of these positions, futurism and preterism, they both assert the same thing, that the little horn, the Antichrist, is a single solitary individual human being. Preterists just chuck him way in the distant past, around 70 AD, or someone like a Nero who was dead before 70 AD, by the way. And the futurists chuck him way in the future and say he's going to be like a Nikolai Carpathia or a Damien from the movie The Omen, right? Nikolai Carpathia from the Left Behind series. That's who the authors named as the Antichrist was. His name was Nikolai Carpathia. Both of these systems are false. Both of them are an abandonment of the Reformation. An abandonment of the Reformation. The prophecy of Daniel 7 gives us a repeat, an expanded version of Daniel chapter 2. One of the expansions in chapter 7 of Daniel will include the mysterious little horn, the Antichrist. Daniel chapter 2 does not talk about the Antichrist. Daniel 7 does. 4 great beasts that came up out of the sea. These are empires. Empires, not single solitary individual human beings. Okay, the 4th beast. Okay, so you got 1, 2, 3, 4, the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Grecian, and then finally the 4th beast is the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire had 10 horns, and there came up among those 10 horns another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. So you got 10 horns, 3 of them plucked up by the roots, then the little horn arises. You see the order there, right? The language is kind of, you have to logically deduce here. 10 horns, 3 of the 10 are plucked up by the roots, and then this little horn rises to power with a mouth speaking great things. False propositions or assertions, as Martin Luther called them. You take away assertions, you take away Christianity. There is no Christianity without assertions. So this little horn had a mouth speaking great assertions, propositions. Remember, we talked about how all knowledge is propositional. All knowledge. Knowledge of the gospel is propositional. Words put together that mean stuff. The whole Bible is filled with nothing but propositions. Words put together that mean stuff. Historical though they may be, they are still words put together that mean stuff. Communicative words. The 4 beasts parallel the 4 metal elements, Daniel 2. So the Babylonian Empire, head of gold, Daniel 2. Medo-Persian Empire, chest and arms of silver, bear raised up one side, 3 ribs in its teeth. The 3 ribs likely refers to the 3 major conquests of the Medo-Persian Empire over Lydia, Babylon. That's when the Medo-Persian Empire became an empire, is because they overthrew Babylon. And then, of course, later Egypt. Then the rise of the Grecian Empire after the Medo-Persian, and then finally the rise of the Roman Empire. Notice 168 BC to 476 AD. So I am not in dispute with them on these proper dates of the Roman Empire, 168 to 476. What I am in dispute is the fact that that little horn doesn't arise until after the fall of the Roman Empire, not before it. The 10 horns symbolize the 10 tribal kingdoms that made up the Roman Empire after its fall. These are the 10 kings, 10 horns. A king is not a king without a kingdom. The Ostrogoths, Burgundians, Vandals, Heruli, Visigoths, Suevi, Alemanni, Franks, Saxons, and Lombards. Remember, 3 of these would be plucked up by the roots, and the other 7 basically make up the people groups that make up Western Europe, or roughly, sort of middle to Western Europe to this very day. To this very day, these people groups still make up Europe, except for 3 of them. The Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths were uprooted. But the Burgundians, the Visigoths, Suevi, Alemanni, Franks, Saxons, Lombards, they all still make up the people groups of Europe to this very day. So that in the French language, the French don't call Germany, Germany. You know what they call Germany in French? Allemagne. Allemagne. From the Alemanni people. They were a Germanic people. Vandals were a Germanic people too. A few of these were. Noted 18th century Reformed Baptist theologian, scholar, biblical exegete, and historicist, Dr. John Gill, writes in his commentary on Daniel 7:24, the 10 horns out of this kingdom, this 4th beast, the Roman Empire, are 10 kingdoms which sprung out of the Roman Empire upon the dissolution of it about AD 476. And he gives Meade's list here, very similar to my own list. He gives Sir Isaac Newton's list, very similar to my own, except he includes the Huns. I don't include the Huns because they weren't a kingdom people, but a nomadic people. So, but I can see why somebody would want to include the Huns in that. So I desired to know the truth, says Daniel, about the fourth beast and the 10 horns and the other horn that came up, before which 3 fell. So 10 horns, 3 fall, then the little horn, which had a mouth that spoke great things. This horn, this is why this is important for Daniel. This horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. This is the second coming, by the way. The Ancient of Days came. That's the second. This is the second coming of Jesus, not the first coming of Jesus. And we can have a discussion about that. This little horn would make war with the saints and prevail over them. Conquer them, says Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10, talking about the sea beast. That's why the sea beast is the same as the little horn. The sea beast of Revelation 13, 1 through 10, and the little horn of Daniel 7 are the same entity. They both make war with the saints and conquer them. War with the saints and prevail over them. They both continue for 42 months, or time times half a time. In Daniel 7:25, time times half a time. Revelation 13, 1 through 10, I think it's verse 7, or something like that. Revelation 13, 1 through 10, 42 months. Okay? So the 3 horns that were plucked up by the roots have to be removed were the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. Notice, all after the fall of the Roman Empire, 493, then 534, then 538. See, notice, after the fall. This was the restrainer. The Roman Empire was the restrainer of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Paul didn't name it, because if Paul named it, what do you think the Roman Empire would do to Christians with their documents? Paul's writings were part of Christian scripture. Oh, these Christians are teaching that the Roman Empire is going to go away and fall and whatnot. They would be persecuted for that, wouldn't they? So Paul didn't name it, but he said, you know what is restraining. You know. All we have to do is go back to Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 especially. Okay? Which is Old Testament. You know, the Romans had a certain amount. Judaism, religious Judaism, was a religio licita, or religio licita. It was a licit religion. Not in the sense of legal religion, it was simply a respected religion. Judaism was a respected religion at the time of the Roman Empire. The pagan Roman Empire respected the Jewish religion because to the Romans, the Judaism was ancient. Okay, we're talking about the ancient Roman Empire, but to the ancient Romans, Judaism was ancient, and the Romans tended to have a certain amount of respect for things that were ancient. The Jews could trace their lineage back to the pharaohs of Egypt. The Romans respected that. Okay, so it was a religio licita, or licita, a licit religion. In the loosely translated, a legal religion, but not so much legal as just respected. That, you know, it's hard to sometimes translate these words into our common way of speaking. But until, of course, 70 A.D., and then later the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 A.D., which then the Romans, so the Jews in Judea were rebelling against the Roman Empire, and this caused, obviously, tremendous consternation of the Romans throughout the empire against the Jews, especially in Judea. And then that was most likely that 70 AD revolt caused a bigger break between the Christian church and, religious but unbelieving in the Messiah Jews. Okay? And this is most likely probably began in Rome, where things like the Sabbath day, the seventh-day Sabbath, started to not be observed by Christians because they wanted to differentiate themselves from the Jews who did keep Sabbath. But for a long time, Christians kept Sabbath. Not the first day of the week, not Sunday, the seventh-day Sabbath. Okay, and the Romans would look at the Christians as being, well, these are just Jews too. They didn't really make a huge difference between unbelieving in the Messiah Jews and Christians. Okay, if you were both celebrating because you both had the same book and celebrating, observing the Sabbath, how could they see a difference between that? It was genetic fallacy all over the place. 14 minutes in. Okay, so getting back, the 3 horns that were plucked up by the roots. The Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. These three horns were the last of the Arian holdouts. So they held to the Arian heresy. The Heruli were Arians. Look up the Christological heresy in church history, the Arians. And notice this, long after the Council of Nicaea, Arians were still around, weren't they? Right? Correcting Joel Webbin and his nonsense over at Right Response. You know, how the state saved the church and all that nonsense. Absolute blasphemy, by the way. The state never saved the church. The church has been saved by grace through faith in the gospel of Christ. Never any other way. But notice, Council of Nicaea 325, they didn't... The Arians were still around until the 6th century AD. The Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. I give a basic outline of these three horns being plucked up by the roots. Again, last of the Arian heretic holdouts. The Heruli were the first of the barbarian tribes to invade and subsequently rule over Rome in 476 AD. So that's why Rome comes to an end in 476 AD, is because the Heruli and the ruler, the Heruli king, Odoacer, with his army rode into Rome and usurped the last of the Roman emperors there, Romulus Augustulus, who was a boy of only around 16. Some sources say he was as young as 11, maybe some say he was 13. But while Odoacer did not execute him, he did proclaim himself king in Rome. Odoacer was an Arian, but he was tolerant toward notice this, the Catholics. What does Catholic mean? Well, it literally means universal. But it came to be directly associated with the doctrine of the Trinity. That's why, as a Baptist, I can say I'm a Catholic. The Papists do not have the monopoly on the word Catholic. Okay? 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith says, we are the Catholic Church, the Catholic or universal church. Okay? And it's Trinitarian. Odoacer, however, was hated by the Italians. And at the suggestion of the Eastern Emperor, so remember there's East and West at this point, the ruler of the Ostrogoths, Theodoric, invaded Italy in 489, eventually secured the surrender of Odoacer in 493. Thus, the first of the three horns was uprooted. Theodoric was also an Arian, but was also very tolerant toward the Catholic Trinitarians there. Okay. The Vandals, however, who had settled in North Africa since their sacking the city of Carthage in 439, were violently opposed to the Trinitarian Catholics. Think Athanasius, about a century before this, having to flee for his life in Northern Africa for being a Trinitarian, for defending the Trinity, the doctrine of the Trinity. He had to flee for his life on several occasions from some Arians who were after him. That's why we actually have descriptions of Athanasius. And let me tell you, Athanasius, as an African, was not white. He was a small in stature with man with raisin-like skin. Means he was a small in stature black man. That's who Athanasius was, the great defender of the doctrine of the Trinity over against the Arian heresy. But still Arians in Northern Africa, the Vandals. In order to assist the West, the Emperor now Justinian, after Zeno, sent his ablest general Belisarius to go up against the Vandals and vanquish them completely in 534 AD. Belisarius is probably known as one of the greatest of the ancient generals. Just a tremendous name, tremendous general. Anyway. But the second of the horn, so the Vandals vanquished 534 AD in Northern Africa. Belisarius then turns his attention toward the Ostrogoths in Italy, and in 538, Justinian lands an Eastern army to assist Belisarius in his overthrow of the Ostrogoths there in Italy. The Ostrogoths abandoned Rome at this time, and this was the real end of Ostrogothic power in the West. Thus, the third of the horns was uprooted in 538 AD. As a result of this, the Code of Justinian, two royal letters incorporated into the code, making the Bishop of Rome the head of all the holy churches, unbiblical ecclesiology, also the head of all the holy priests of God, unbiblical ecclesiology. See? In about 538 AD. Okay? So then the little horn rises to power, obviously. The bishops of Rome. The Antichrist rises to power, would persecute the Church of Christ through their false teachings and false doctrines for 1260 years before receiving a deadly wound in about 1798. Let's see. Formal fallacies. Let's go. Yeah, Napoleon and the Catholic Church in 1798. One of Napoleon's generals, Louis Alexandre Berthier, marched into Rome, entered it unopposed, February 1798, proclaiming a Roman republic, demanded the Pope renounce his temporal power. So, and that deadly wound, of course, has been healing ever since. So, there we go. Time times half a time. Revelation 13. 42 months, mouth uttering hot. This is Revelation 13, not Daniel 7, but very similar language to Daniel 7 and the little horn. 42 months, blaspheming against God, blaspheming his name, allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, the bishops of Rome. 42 months. In Daniel 7, it's time times half a time. That's 1260 literal years. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. How the Preterists have no leg to stand on, no legs at all to stand on with their nonsense. That the little horn was Nero or some such nonsense, or some, Roman Caesar. Nope, didn't arise till after the fall of the Roman Empire. Talk to you soon. Soli Deo Gloria.